Hello and welcome to the Purpose Pursuit podcast with me, Hannah Miller, a podcast helping you live your life more fully and more aligned with your purpose. It is good to be back with you. I hope you're doing well today. Today's episode comes from lots of DMs and conversations and something that comes up all the time in my workshops or when I'm coaching people one-to-one. And it is this concept of what do I do to help advocate or manage up with my boss or my leader or my employer? How do I manage up? How do I represent myself to them? Or how do I help them see my perspective? And we're calling this episode Managing Up. It's about this idea of being able to, when you may be the person who doesn't have as much traditional power in the situation, how do you lead the person who's potentially leading or managing you? How do you help them see things differently or explain things from a different perspective to perhaps get a different outcome? And it is a massive challenge for people. I mean, we've just been talking about it in preparation for the pod, and everybody has to do an element of managing up of people around them. You could argue that sometimes my children manage me. You know, they manage up to me. They put things in a certain way to help get a certain response from me. Laura definitely has to manage up to me at times, and that's a definite fact. And it is something that happens everywhere. I remember when I used to be an employee, there were so many decisions or ways that we were approaching things that I just didn't agree with, or I didn't feel my boss had all the information, or I didn't feel she was perhaps in the right frame of mind to make that decision. And all those factors are an element of having to potentially manage up. And it is a concern. It is considered as one of the key personal challenges at work. I've been looking at some data that people suggested it's about. It's one of the top internal concerns that people have. The idea of being able to manage up or develop the leaders that are coming on through. And actually, conflict at work affects about a quarter of us. And I think it probably affects more than that, if I'm honest with you. At least a quarter of us experience conflict at work. And managing up isn't necessarily about bad situations or high conflict, but it's about a situation where you may not agree, you may not feel your boss has all the facts, or you may not feel they are in the right position to be making a certain decision. And so we're going to look together at some of the mechanics of this, some of the things that we can understand about why it happens and what we can also do about it. And I've been reflecting on my own experiences and the ways I've done this well and the ways I've not done this well as part of my own preparation. So listen in and we'll take our way through this subject and see if I can give you some nuggets to help you approach this differently. I think there's something to be said at the start of this, that there is obviously an element of this that is entirely out of your control. And that is your boss's ability to listen, grow, or take on other people's perspective. And you're going to have a whole range of experiences there. There will be people who have absolutely no bandwidth for being wrong or for listening. And then there are other people who are so easily swayed that they don't do anything without consensus. And all of the decisions they make are made through a community and everyone agreeing. And you will have a boss somewhere on that spectrum. And then you are somewhere on that spectrum as well. And the combination of those factors impact how this is going to turn out. So the very first thing I want to talk about as we get into this subject of how do I manage up, how do I bring a different perspective, how do I influence essentially somebody who has more traditional power than I do, is to understand that personality element. And connected to the personality element is the character element. And, you know, there is a whole thing about being humble. Is your boss somebody who's humble enough to think they may not know everything? They've got enough humility to recognize that you may have a piece of information or a perspective that could alter the way they're seeing things. And if they do not have any humility, you're going to have to think really carefully about how you approach this. It doesn't mean you can't, but you're going to have to be super careful how you do that. And then there's your own humility and your own character. Are you going into this situation with this sort of carte blanche thing that you know you are right and everybody is wrong? Or this is a no-brainer that your thoughts on this are correct, and so therefore I must get my way through. I was reflecting on a few situations through my time as an employee. as I was preparing for this. And I can remember a really specific incident when I was in a leadership team meeting, and I can't even remember what we were talking about, but I really felt differently to everybody else. And I'd really locked onto the idea that this was a bad decision. And I can remember like starting off in conversation, being able to articulate my thoughts, being able to say why I felt this wasn't a good idea and why I felt this different perspective was how we should approach it. And I also remember that as the conversation went on, I could feel myself getting a bit more emotional and petulant. And I started to step back from the conversation and almost, a bit like a toddler, cross my arms and step back a little bit and act like, oh, the drain and the dishwasher just making a noise, but we'll carry on. I started to think, I'm not even going to bother anymore. This is a ridiculous decision they've made. They can fall on their own swords. And that was a long time ago. Like I'm talking maybe a good 15 years ago from now. And I look back on that and I think that wasn't my finest moment. I didn't finish that conversation well. It started well. It was fine that I disagreed, but I didn't come with the rest of my team effectively in order to show the fact that I was still in collaboration with them. We were still a team, even though I disagreed. And I look back at that as a moment when I didn't handle myself well. My emotions weren't under control. And the thing is, when we come into a situation where we feel differently about something, there are a whole load of things at play. There is the decision that's being made, there is the scenario that you're in, and then there is all the stuff that you are bringing with you and your boss is bringing and any other team member. And sometimes something triggers a feeling in us or a sense of conviction or strong opinion that's actually not even anything to do with that current situation, or it's a bit to do with that, but it's a lot to do with something else as well. And so I think knowing ourselves, knowing our personality, knowing our shortfalls, knowing our talents and strengths is just tantamount to the likelihood of the success, at least the bit of success that you are in control of. You are not in control of how your boss is going to respond, or their levels of humility or teachableness or ability to hear a different perspective. You can't control that, but you can control you. So I think getting to know yourself, getting to understand your unique way of doing things is so important, and continuing to be a person that recognises that even though I feel really strongly about this, I might be wrong, or there may be more than one right way. I think that's something I've really learnt. So I think that's the first thing I would say. And that leads into the way I work with everybody. You know, any leader I work with, any individual who wants to discover what their purpose is going to look like for the next season of their life, we always come back to who are you, what do you do best, what are your unique talents, and what do you need to watch out for. If you don't know any of that about yourself, or you've only got limited understanding and not very much language around that, there are lots of ways you can spend some time thinking about that. You can pre-order my book and you can find out a bit more about your unique personality and talents through some of the reflective activities that you'll find in the Purpose Pursuit book, available at all good booksellers. Well, it's available for pre-order anyway, depending on when you're listening to this. So that is the first thing I would say. Know yourself and know the individuals around you. And then I'm going to give you a few other tips to think about, okay? A few things to consider. I think one thing that I want to say first of all as well is, rather than just thinking about something as a power construct, can we think about it more as a relationship construct, a relational construct? And whereas when we're in a power construct and we think, well, this is the boss and I am the subordinate, the power construct means that they hold the power and I do not. If we've got more of a relational construct, everybody has a level of agency and responsibility. And so in my team, I would never want there to be a dynamic, which means that although I may have final say on a decision, that they do not have agency to disagree, to try and change my opinion, to reflect things back to me, and so on and so forth. And like I said before, it is not just about these are not just situations where we've got a really difficult boss. This is just about relationship dynamic. How do we work with somebody else around us and potentially upwardly influence or upwardly manage somebody who is our leader? So I talked to Laura about this as well, and I said, how have you done it with me? You know, we had a little bit of a conversation around what are some of the things that she's learned. And I think one thing that she said was really good is to sometimes, well, two things she said. One was come back to a shared goal or something that we've already previously agreed. And I definitely used to do this with my bosses as well. If we've already talked about what our objectives are, what our priorities are, or what we both want for the business, the organisation, the charity, then reminding that shared goal is a great starting place. And actually, it's a great place to start in any difficult conversation where you are maybe trying to disagree or manage up or anything like that, is to say we both think this, or this is what we agreed. And so there've been a couple of situations where we've made decisions as a business, like to can something or to stop doing something. And then sometimes in a bit of a fit of panic or a quick idea that's come to me, I've said to the team, right, we're going to do this and we're going to get this going. And this is how we're going to resolve this problem. And this is how we're going to meet the shortfall and so on and so forth. And Laura and Zoe and others have often reminded me of this isn't what we said we were going to do. Like gently said, actually, this is what we said the priority was, and does this agree with that priority? And reminding people of where you said you were going is such a helpful plumb line to help your leader, who is maybe now clasping at something or grasping at something, to see, is this getting us closer to that shared goal and priority, or is it moving us further away? Added to that could be how we've agreed we're going to work in terms of values. Are we behaving in a way that is in line with the values we've agreed we want to represent or not? If I've got a company value of adventure and I say to the team, this year we're going to do nothing different and we're going to batten down the hatches and we're just going to do everything we can to make it stable. The team would be well within their rights to remind me of a value of adventure and say, are we really living aligned with that value? Or is it lip service and it doesn't really mean anything? So I think having shared goals, shared values, things that are anchor points to bring the conversation back to can be a great place to look for that launching off point before you then show some reticence over the sense of direction. And to be honest, that was enough for me on a couple of occasions to go, do you know what, you're right. Also, another thing to do is ask questions. And Laura said this, and I would also agree. Rather than stating opinions and saying, this is what I think, are there some questions that open up the conversation and allow you to get your leader to explain or think differently, etc.? So in the conversation I just mentioned, a question could be, is us starting this project going to bring us closer to what we said our goals were this year? Is starting this project aligned with our priorities? Or another question, what's driving this decision? I mean, that's such a good question. I'd love you to explain what's driving this decision to me. Is there something more that's going on here? All of those kind of questions can help somebody to articulate. And it stops it from sounding like we're bringing gospel truth, which I know I've done before when I'm like, this is the right way, this is a definite fact. When actually I'm learning, the older I get, the more and more there can be more than one right way of doing things. And I need to understand that. I think another great point from my research is to be realistic about how much of a risk speaking up is. I think sometimes some personalities turn it into a massive thing, a massive ordeal. I can't possibly say what I think. I can't possibly voice my opinion. They're not going to agree with me. I'm going to be blacklisted. I'll never get a promotion again. I'll be put out in the cold. This is the end of my, being seen as part of the inner ring because I've dissented. I would say if those risks are true, and they really are true, and they're likely to happen, there's something much bigger at play with your workplace than your ability to be able to speak up in a situation. And I'd say there's some stuff you need to think about as to whether this is somewhere you should be. I would say that if that level of risk is true and you're not overplaying it, there's something to think about in terms of what is going on in your workplace. But if actually these are more fears that you don't have evidence for, I would say that's not a reason to do it. Sometimes we worry about things that are just not that big a deal when they happen. We have thoughts in our head that feel really big and really real, but when we say them to somebody else, we realise actually that's highly unlikely to happen. It isn't like that here. So I think there's something about being realistic about the risks. I think there's something about coming back to shared goals and shared values. And also company objectives, I think if you've got an idea you want to present to your boss, I've done this loads of times when I had ideas or solutions to problems, I would always couch it in the language of where we were trying to go as an organisation. This will get us closer to this goal. So we have to learn to speak the language of the person that we're managing up. If I just go with my lens and my perspective and I haven't done any translation work, I'm not going to help it land with that other person. So in the same way, like if one of my teenagers wants to ask for something from me, if they haven't thought about how they're going to present that to me and they just come with their ask or their disagreement, it isn't going to land in the same way as thinking about shared goals, things that are going to make me have my ears open to listen. And I don't think it's that different to in a conversation at work. So do your thinking, do your research, think about the objectives, contextualize what you're saying in something that you understand and translate for them. If they are deeply interested in, at the moment, maybe their current thing is all about efficiencies. So if you've got an idea or a suggestion, you've got to talk the language of efficiencies. If your boss is very relational, then use relational language. You've got to translate and do that work, and we have to do that work ourselves. I think we have to not expect them to translate for us. We have to think about how we're going to do that. There was something really interesting I read in my research, which was about asking permission to disagree. And the person who suggested this said, this might sound like you're being overly differential, but it's quite a smart way to give the person with more power psychological safety to allow you to disagree with them. So rather than going in and saying, I think the plan that you're making is wrong and I disagree with you, if you start with, would it be okay if I said something that was in disagreement? Can I challenge this thinking? Are you okay with me doing that? That person is then allowing you to bring that perspective. You could do it anyway, but that process of allowance means that perhaps their mind, thoughts, response is going to be a little bit more open to you, rather than just doing what we often do when someone challenges us. Let's be honest, we go on the defensive. It's very easy, very quickly to defend when somebody says they don't agree with us or they challenge the way we did something. Or maybe it's not about that you're disagreeing with a direction of travel. Perhaps your boss just behaved in a way that you think needs challenging. So if you're about to do something like that, you're going to have to come back to the reasons why you're doing it, the shared goals, and ask for permission to do so, to allow that person's defences to come down and for their shackles to reduce rather than increase all of those things. So think carefully about how you start and how you approach it. And I also think it's a really good idea to validate what their original point might be or where they're trying to get to. So even if you think they didn't handle something well or the decision they've made isn't the right one, go back to saying, I understand the proposal or why you think this is the right thing to do or why you may have done X, Y, Z. However, can I propose this? So you're not just going, this is stupid, this is right, or you did the wrong thing, I'm saying the right thing. You're saying, I can see why you're thinking that, but can I offer this? That would be a better way to do it. I think there's something else we need to be careful of, and this sounds really obvious, but when we're feeling passionate or a bit, we're in one of those more tense situations, we can start to use really unhelpful judgment words like this is foolish, this is hasty, this is so short-sighted or naive. Words like that, again, just cause people to be defensive. If Laura had said to me when I was trying to solve a business issue the way I was, which was definitely fear-based, if she'd have said to me, you're just trying to problem solve yourself and this is driven by fear, I may have been like, whoa, that's a lot. And that's not what you'd call radical candor. It's a bit rude, you know? So radical candor is being clear and being kind. And so if you haven't listened to the Radical Candor episode, go back and listen to my conversation with Amy Sandler because it's brilliant. And she talks all about this clarity and is kindness. And so rather than just being too to the point and saying you're foolish, you're hasty, you're short-sighted, think about, instead of using judgment words, you take out all those adjectives actually and just watch your language really carefully. I think rather than saying my way is right and your way is wrong, that just causes people to take sides, side A, side B. I think using more of a humble, perspective-driven, opinion-based, what about this, helps us to find a way through that could be quite a compromise rather than saying my way is the gospel truth. And that's definitely something I know I have to watch that I do. So I think we need to explain we have a different opinion, ask to voice it. We could go back to the original point of view and decision and be clear that you understood it, how they meant it. I think it's important that we slow things down. We don't speak with too much passion and too much gusto. Gosh, I know sometimes when I'm on a trustee board of a couple of different charities, and sometimes I can be so clear on what I think that the whole thing can become quite passionate. Then it's overwhelming, and actually the message can get lost in it. And I've got to take responsibility for that. I remember hearing someone talk about dissent years ago, and dissent in a team when you're making big decisions. And that as a leader, if you're listening to this and you're a leader, we've got to give a few opportunities for people to really disagree with us, to dissent. And I think it's Patrick Lencioni that talks about giving people the time to dissent like 3 times when you're going through the decision-making process and the problem-solving process. But then when you do lock onto a decision, there's a time and a place for us not to disagree anymore and not to dissent, and instead to just switch to be fully on board and trying to do everything we can to make it a success. I don't know whether you've ever almost wanted something not to succeed because you didn't agree with it, whether you've ever found it difficult to do that because there's part of you that's like, well, I never thought we should have done this anyway, so I really hope it fails. Actually, really good teamwork is when we put that aside and we do everything we can to make it work, even if we didn't think it was the right choice. We make it clear that we didn't agree, we state our opinions, and then we do everything we can to make it work. The only caveat I have on that is if you feel like your values have been crossed. If you feel like a decision's been made that's high stakes in terms of your values, just getting on board with it is causing yourself moral injury. We've talked about this before. Moral injury is the feeling of having experienced something or partaken in something that crossed your values. So you at that point have some decisions to make. If it's rather a decision of style or a decision that's, I would have chosen a different outcome, that's different to when you feel that the decision is like crossing a value that you have. I know somebody who recently left a workplace. In fact, I can think of 2 that I've coached recently. And a massive part of their decision to move on was when a decision was made that was too close to a value and they had to work on an exit. That's a chance to think, actually, this is not the right place for me. And that is quite different to, I just would have done it differently, or I don't fully agree with this, but I can make my peace with it. Only you know the answer to that. I think it's about going with the positive intent, actually, as well, that disagreement is a good thing. We come to better decisions when we really explore them from every angle. We don't make great decisions when everybody agrees with us, when nobody's challenging, when nobody's bringing a perspective that we've not thought of. We are not going to make the best decisions. Actually getting people in, if you are a manager, getting people to say, what have I missed? What do you think? How would you do this differently? What have I got to watch out for? Tell me all the reasons why my idea is not a good one. Is creating and cultivating an environment where people feel free to do this, but also you're modelling that nobody has all the solutions. Nobody is going to get everything right every time. And I think when you haven't handled a situation well, as a leader, we've got to be really willing to put our hands up and say, I'm sorry of how I behaved today. I can remember a day actually when I was really stressed last year at work, and I was definitely short and I was definitely not behaving like myself. And those are moments where I have to say to my team, I'm not right today, and that's my responsibility, and I'm sorry for how I've been. And so that is modelling imperfection but ownership for what we've done. So I think there's one last thing I want to say is that when you feel yourself really bothered by a decision and you've been through the process, I think it's so important to reflect on what's really bothering you about this decision. Often it's because something that you value or something that for you is a high strength, like a talent that you have, has been undermined or not considered in the process. And knowing and understanding why you feel like you do is so important, because it's going to spill out somewhere or another. It's going to come out in some way. So actually owning it, understanding it, and going through that process is so important before approaching your boss. So I guess just to kind of round up this episode, pause and assess the power dynamics. Build relationship with this person. Get to know who they are. Think about what your shared objectives and values are, or where you're heading, what the future is saying. Think about what questions you can ask, and offer and ask about whether you can share your opinion or a different perspective before just launching into it. You can be kind and clear, but you don't have to apologise for that. And if they just don't take it well, or they don't like it, or they don't agree with you, this is a moment not to take it personally and recognise actually that you've done the preparation work, you've done your bit, and how somebody else responds or the outcomes or the decisions that they make are not your responsibility. You did the right thing in managing and advocating for yourself and bringing a different perspective. This is not going to go away. This is an ongoing situation. Learn how to speak someone else's language. Learn how to translate. Try to remove your own personal bias out of things and approach something from a place where actually I want us to get to a shared, agreed place in the end. And I wish you all the very luck as you approach this.